Welcome to Fans First, a sports podcast where your voice matters most. Hosted by Hall of Fame sportscaster Jim Powell. This is the show that puts fans at the heart of the conversation. Whether you're cheering in the stands, screaming at the TV, or debating with friends about the latest trades, Fans First is here to amplify your thoughts, your insights, and your love for the game.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Fans First, a sports podcast. My name is Jim Powell. I'm very pleased and honored to be your host. Also very pleased and honored to have with us a very special guest, one of the great voices of the NFL and a lot of college sports as well. His name is Wes Durham, and he has joined us to be our special guest on today's show. Wes, great to see you.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be with you.
So, obviously, you just worked a Falcons game. I listened to it. And you did a great job per usual. You do all kinds of sports. I bet you've probably done just about every sport that there is at one time or another on your climbing of the mountain. But do you have a favorite sport of all of them? If they took away all the sports but one and left you just one, which one would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And I've dodged this one a long time. Because they're really all different. I mean, I tell folks I've been blessed now for 21 years to do college football on Saturdays and the NFL on Sundays. And I tell people, even when it's the same sport, like football, they're different. And especially in our part of the country. I mean, in the Southeast, college football is just such a generational thing in many respects. And in the NFL, it's interesting, Jim, you got to go to certain marketplaces to find the generational ties with the NFL that we have in college football in the Southeast. And because of that, and I think the biggest reason is when you step back and look at it, the NFL's not that old in this part of the world. It's just almost, the Falcons opened for the 58th year yesterday. So when you start to think about heritage teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers or the New York Giants, Chicago Bears, Green Bay Packers, Cleveland Browns, you're really thinking about teams in the case of the New York Giants who are a century old. And the more you kind of get around the college game, you realize how generational it is. You know, not just fathers and sons. It's fathers, sons, grandfathers, and in some cases, great-grandfathers that go to these college games in the Southeast. And so for me, college football is the way I grew up. And Mr. Blank and Rich probably, before I started doing the Falcons in 2004 full-time, I'd watch maybe 4 or 5 NFL games a year. And because I love the medium, and I was fortunate to do some preseason in the late 90s for the Falcons, when I started doing Atlanta in 2004, it really kind of grew on me. And because of my partner, Dave Archer, we've done these games 21 years together. We just have this connectivity that I think is really special in our industry. So for me, though, college football is my core. College basketball is my core. It's what I've done the most of in my career. And if I guess to give you a final answer, it's probably college football. The basketball landscape has changed so much right now, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how college basketball reacts in the next decade to some of these landscape changes.
Wes, when you do finally get a day where you can put your feet up and sit on your couch and watch whatever you feel like watching, is there a particular team that you root for? Obviously, your dad was a big UNC guy. I know you love everything about the ACC and
right.
Do an awful lot of sports in that regard. Who do you root for?
I don't know that I root for anybody anymore. I follow my friends. And it's interesting. My wife and I were just having this conversation last night with my son and daughter-in-law at dinner, because my son recently married. His in-laws are huge Tennessee fans. And so they asked me the question, well, who were you rooting for Saturday night when NC State played Tennessee? And I said, well, actually, I was rooting because Dave Doran and his family are friends. I was rooting for NC State. Now, people say, well, you do games on the ACC network, and that's true. And, obviously our storylines would be a little richer if NC State had won the game. But at the end of the day, and I'm sure you feel the same way about the relationships you've built over the years. You pull for your friends, right? And I consider Dave and Sarah to be good friends. And so you find yourself rooting for friends. And it's not that I just have friends in the ACC, right? I know coaches and players who have played a variety of different places now throughout my career. And that really does hold true. Shane Beamer at the University of South Carolina was a GA at Georgia Tech, his first job out of college when he finished his playing career at Virginia Tech. So when South Carolina won the other day against Kentucky, I felt good for Shane. And that's kind of the way this works now. And it's really weird at almost 60. I'll be 59 in January. I find myself in this relationship industry as much as I do this broadcast industry, right? And I know you feel the same way about the people you've connected with through the years. So that part for me is really, really interesting.
So some of your friends lost yesterday. The Atlanta Falcons, obviously, just couldn't get enough points to pull that one out of the fire.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Falcons? We're going to touch on all the NFL teams, or most of them anyway, during this conversation. But
sure,
may as well start with the team that you just worked for yesterday. As a voice of the Atlanta Falcons, did you expect the Falcons to win that game? Or were you surprised at the outcome?
That's a good question. Yeah, I expected them to win. I thought they would play well. I thought this team has done a lot through the month of August, certainly in preparation for the season. But I knew there would be one challenge. There was one challenge that I thought was really important, and that was the ability to slow Pittsburgh's pass rush down. And I think the biggest storyline in the game was that Kirk Cousins was really not able to get very comfortable in the throw game. And at the end of the day, his inability to engineer any kind of passing threat because of that pass rush created a problem. That and 3 turnovers. The math in the NFL is really funny, Jim. There's certain things that if they happen, you're not going to win the game. And when Atlanta turned it over twice and could not force a turnover, I didn't feel real good. And then when they turned it over the third time, well, that was kind of the nail in the proverbial coffin of the ball game. And for me, that's kind of the gray line you walk every Sunday. There's certain things that happen. Red zone efficiency and turnover margin tend to be just 2 of the pillars that determine who wins and loses a game. When Atlanta kicked a field goal in the first possession, and then when they gave up the field goal in the final possession of the first half, I thought, boy, if they can't find a way to generate a turnover, if they can't find a way to generate a touchdown, it was going to be a tough afternoon. And that actually, I think, proved to be the real difference in the game.
Let me ask you about Michael Penix, because obviously draft day came around and there was lots of discussion, not just in Atlanta, but all across the NFL. I was not one that was on the bandwagon saying, what are they doing? They're nuts over there. Mm-hmm. I've seen him play. He's a very talented young quarterback. Obviously, Kirk Cousins is not in his early 20s and, looking at another 15 years of playing football. So I felt like for a team that had such a bad quarterback situation in recent years, they made sure that was not going to happen to them again this year.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly. And I think that's the part as fans and people who follow this organization, you're like, wait a second, they just paid $100 million guaranteed to a quarterback and they just drafted a quarterback. But then when Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris walked you through kind of the philosophy behind it, you actually understood what they were doing. And you understood that, hey, look, if you have the kind of seasons and 2 or 3 of these in a row, you're going to be glad you got Michael Penix in 5 years. Kirk Cousins is going to be 41. He's probably not going to be playing in the league. He might not be playing for Atlanta. Who knows? The idea was to build at the premium position in this league. And that's the one thing that I think we all have to get our arms around about the NFL is that position right now determines success. You go and look at the list of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL last year, and I think it was 7 that were in the playoffs of those 10. And you start to kind of wrap your arms around the fact that the singular position of quarterback is one that's going to determine at the end of the day whether or not you're in the tournament. And for me, I love the Kirk Cousins signing, and then the signing behind it of Michael Penix, or the drafting behind it of Michael Penix, I thought was a pretty good piece, because the next 2 drafts, despite the way the college product is unfolding right now, the next 2 drafts at that particular position are not going to be particularly strong. And I think that's one of the reasons, too, they went ahead and bit the bullet, so to speak, and took Michael Penix Jr.
So based on the competition in the offseason of roster building, who do you feel like maybe are not the obvious ones like the Chiefs and teams that, have been beating down the door to the Super Bowl for quite a while? Who are some of the teams that you feel like are going to surprise some fans because they won't realize that how good they really are?
Good question. I think you have to also process it's a good part to say, every game's important, but you can't reside an answer after like week 1, week 2, week 3. You've got to get into the course of the season. And I say that in part because of injury more than anything else. The physicality at the NFL level is unlike anything you really see, Jim. And for me, I would give you, let me give you an example. We saw Jacksonville in the preseason. And I think Jacksonville reminds me a little bit of Detroit from a year ago. Okay. Trevor Lawrence obviously has gotten a huge contract, but they've done things elsewise on that team, right, to get it better. So Jacksonville would be a team that I think they've kind of built it the right way. The other team that I find fascinating, I think San Francisco, and this is going to be, everybody says, well, San Francisco, they went to the Super Bowl. Sure, they're in. Yeah, but you got to, in the NFL, you got to know when to say goodbye to people, right? Like, for instance, you mentioned Kansas City. They said goodbye to Tyreek Hill. I mean, he was an explosive player. Well, what happened? They went and found Rashee Rice. They go and draft Xavier Worthy. I mean, they go and find other guys, right, to fill those type gaps. And the team that set that standard for me was New England. Because when Belichick and New England were kind of driving and everybody got caught up in Brady, but think about the people that New England said goodbye to along the way while keeping Tom Brady at quarterback. I mean, they had everybody run the ball from Corey Dillon to James White. They had everybody catch the ball from Julian Edelman to Randy Moss. And remember at one point, and I think a lot of people in this marketplace would remember in this part of the country, they let Richard Seymour go. Richard Seymour went to the Hall of Fame, and they let him go. And he went to Oakland at the time and ended up finishing his career. They let Lawyer Malloy go. Lawyer Malloy was a staple of their Super Bowls, and they let Lawyer Malloy go. Then he came to Atlanta and actually was part of the rebuilding job in 2008 for Atlanta. That's kind of what I mean. You got to know when to say goodbye. And so the teams that have done it and done it in the compromising spot of keeping your cap number right, keeping your contract bases right, paying the players you have to play the big money to, quarterbacks, that kind of thing. Jacksonville strikes me as a team that might be ready. Now, Houston's in that division. Indianapolis is in that division. Tennessee's in that division. So that's a bit of a crapshoot. But outside of the favorites, Jacksonville is one that kind of I look at and say, you know what? I could see them. Look, Doug Peterson's a good coach. Lawrence is a terrific talent. And for me, I think they've probably got a schedule that they could negotiate into the playoffs and maybe even make a run once they get there.
What do you think the loss of Jordan Love is going to mean to the Packers? I know they're talking about maybe he'd be back even in 2 weeks, but they're really hoping that he's back in 3 weeks. But in the NFL, that's 2 games or 3 games that you probably lose because they don't really have a talent as a backup quarterback.
Yeah, when you and this is where the Penix thing comes back to the conversation, right? And people say, well, why'd you draft Michael Penix? Well, here's why you drafted Michael Penix. Now, the runway's a lot shorter for Michael than it is if Kirk Cousins were to get hurt. Well, Malik Willis is the backup in Green Bay. And as Dave Archer, my partner, reminded me on Sunday when we were doing the broadcast, he said, I had no idea Malik Willis was in Green Bay. I didn't either. Yeah. I mean, and here's Malik Willis, who we saw a year ago as kind of a 1A, 1B deal with Will Levis in Nashville when Ryan Tannehill got hurt. And now Will Levis won that job, right, because of what he did against Atlanta and on through the rest of the season. But it just goes to show you now that Matt LaFleur, who once was an Atlanta assistant, who I think the world of as a guy, Matt LaFleur now has to almost reset his entire offensive playbook to accomplish what Malik Willis's skill set is right now for him. He's got to grow it. He's got to grow it where he can, but right now he's got to retract that playbook down to where Willis can digest it. And I tell you what, that's a long way to go to play a game, man, to lose your quarterback. I'm just going to say. The way it happened and late in the game and all those things, and now all of a sudden you might be without him 6 weeks. That's a tough ride if you're Green Bay.
Well, that's why you mentioned Ryan Tannehill a moment ago. They've already called Tannehill to see, hey, what are you doing, buddy?
Yeah.
You want to come over and play some football?
Stranger things have happened, man. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Who are some of the teams that we think are just perennially very strong in the NFL that you feel like this year may not be that strong?
It feels like Dallas cleaned up all their drama before the year kind of got going. So that's good. At least they got CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott under some sort of working agreement. So they really don't have any reason to have distractions now. I think we all talk about the Bengals, and yet there's something about Cincinnati right now that I'm not quite sure they're all connected. Chase holding out or holding in, as they call it now, might be something there. I'm probably as interested as anyone to see if the Jets can get to where everybody thought they were going to go last year. They're basically the same football team they were a year ago. But 8 is back in the lineup, and when Aaron Rodgers is really good, he's really good. So for me, I think San Francisco, Kansas City, and Baltimore, Jim, right now are the 3 best teams in the NFL. I think those are the teams that everybody's got to at least try to say, okay, we're going to get there. And if we get there, what kind of chance do we have? How are we going to handle it? I put Detroit in that next group of teams. I think we all kind of fell in love with the way Dan Campbell coaches and their team and the story and the hardship of the people in Detroit who, finally got that home playoff win last year and that kind of thing and almost got to the Super Bowl. But after watching them on Sunday night for the first time, I like the Lions. I don't know that I love the Lions yet. I think they're really good on defense. But for me, I just think it's really hard to make a move here. Houston might be the one I would say. If we're going to take somebody, kind of beyond the first 2 levels of contenders, I've been asked all summer about the NFC South. And people say, well, it's Atlanta's division to win. Yeah, but things happen in this league. I mean, for the years you did make big league baseball, things happen in baseball. No matter how much you pay and how deep your roster is, it doesn't work like that sometimes. And professional sports is unique in that light because everybody has roughly the same number, but the chemistry just doesn't kick. And if the chemistry doesn't kick, it can be a long struggle. And I think Atlanta does have that chance. And if Atlanta kind of continues to ascend, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this team develop too.
I'd like to get a hot take from you about the football game down in Brazil.
Yeah.
You already alluded to how far of a flight that is, how long, and obviously it was really long on the way back with Jordan Love, nursing a significant injury that happened 5 seconds before the end of the football game.
Yeah.
Does the NFL, I understand why they want to expand the footprint of the National Football League. And we love the sport. We love the product. Right. Happy to share it with people all around the world. But when you go to a foreign venue like they did, shouldn't there be some sort of a standard that the NFL holds their international partners to in terms of the quality of the field? I mean, that first quarter of that game, people were sliding around like they were hockey players. I mean, it was nobody could, and everybody was running to the sidelines to change their cleats again, try a new combination. And the whole time I'm thinking, why does the NFL allow this to happen?
Well, what the NFL does, and I can speak to a little bit of this because we were in Europe last year to play the Jaguars, right? And it's the second time in the last 4 years Atlanta's gone to London. It's the third time in 11 years that Atlanta's gone to Europe. And I can speak to it in this light, Jim. The National Football League just doesn't do this by happenstance, right? They just don't say, hey, by the way, let's pick someplace foreign and we're going to play. It's something that's vetted out. Sao Paulo had been under the microscope of the NFL for about 18 months in terms of all the things that go into the National Football League playing. They want to work with those local municipalities and things like that. I can tell you the infrastructure they've got in Europe and in London in particular is second to none. Now that I've been twice, the third time we didn't go because of the COVID restrictions. But nonetheless, for me, Jim, I think Brazil is a marketplace. South America is a marketplace they want to get to. And I don't think they're done. But in your question about field conditions, that's something they had to go through for the first time. And now I'll tell you it won't happen again because it happens once and it doesn't happen again. You may remember we had a Super Bowl several years ago where the field conditions were not optimal. First half, everybody was sliding, I believe. They were changing shoes. They were doing a bunch of things. And it was a first-time Super Bowl venue. And I can't remember if it was Arizona or if it was I want to think it might have been the Broncos and Panthers in Santa Clara. And they were playing the game in February. It's the NFL's 50th anniversary, I think, right? 50th anniversary of the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 50, year before the Falcons went. And because they were playing in February, the condensation and the way the marine layer came in late in the afternoon or in the morning, they were sliding around and there were guys losing balance or whatever the case may be. I think I'm recalling the game correctly. I may not, so forgive me. But that'll be the last time that happens. Doesn't mean they're not going back to Santa Clara. When they do, though, they'll compensate for that condition. And it's happened with indoor. Like you may remember the natural grass tray services that go into like places like Glendale and things like that. First time they played in Vegas in a regular season game for the Raiders, I think, at Allegiant Stadium, they had a problem with the tray. And so the next time it was eliminated.
Got it.
That's what's going to happen in Brazil. And they're going to go back to Brazil. And the reason I can tell you is they had 50,000 people or however many it was, and it was a sold-out game. The Jacksonville Jaguars have 85,000 unique email addresses for their regular season games they play in London. 85,000. In fact, when the Falcons played over there last year, there were no public sale tickets to the game because the Falcons got the road allotment like they normally would, and the Jaguars season ticket holders in Europe bought the rest of them. It's crazy. I'm telling you, the commitment that the NFL has internationally, and let's be honest, they've reached the saturation point in the United States. We all know about the National Football League. It's 300 days a year, the whole 9 yards. So why not explore Europe? And I don't think they're done with South America. They've assigned international markets. I'm sure you've seen that to teams. Atlanta has marketing rights. I think it's Germany. Every team's kind of been divided up around the world. I don't know for sure where the next land to conquer will be, but I'd be surprised if they don't go to Italy, given the facilities and places like that. Wherever they think they can tap into a new market, I feel fairly confident they're going to try and do it.
Well, I know one thing that's not surprising me is when you get two broadcasters together, they go long.
Oh, yeah.
We could sit here and talk football.
That's it.
All night long and tomorrow too. But I don't want to let you go without. Okay. We got to flip the switch on you.
Oh boy!
I mean, you've worked so many events at such a high level. You know everybody in all the sports. What would you say is the craziest thing you've seen in all your travels and all your games that you've done? Craziest or the funniest?
Wow!
Give us a story.
Well, I will tell you this. Everybody always wants to know about 28-3 in Super Bowl 51. And it's more of an industry story than a fan story. We've all been there. We've all been there with the team that had the lead, and ultimately your team doesn't win. How do you handle it? What do you say? Everybody, the fans want to know, what do you say? For me, though, it always comes down to like the games you don't ever think are going to end the way they end, right? And for me, probably the one that is most remembered by people in my 18 years at Georgia Tech is Calvin Johnson's first road game at Clemson in 2004. Georgia Tech scored twice in the last basically 3 minutes, including a game winner to Calvin Johnson in his first college road game. He caught 3 touchdown passes. It was just an amazing, amazing night for him. And what they don't remember is with like 15 seconds left, Georgia Tech kicked the ball out of bounds. Clemson ran one play, got the ball into plus territory, and threw into the end zone on the last play of the game. And I thought to myself, had Clemson caught that ball, we'd have never talked about Calvin Johnson.
Well, Wes, it's been great to visit with you today. Congratulations, by the way, on being in the Georgia Tech Sports Hall of Fame. That is a great honor, one of many that you already have and many that you will have in the coming years because of your outstanding work. So we look forward to hopefully luring you back here again before long.
Thanks, Jim. Have a great job. I appreciate the visit, and good luck with this project.
Thank you so much, Wes. Well, now it's time for my favorite feature on Fans First. It's, as you know, and you probably guessed, it's time for Get Off My Lawn.
Hey, get off my lawn.
And the submission we get today comes to us from Crazy Dave in Nashville, Tennessee. Dave, what's on your mind?
Jim, have I lost my mind? The NFL says we have to expand our footprint. So they played the first game ever in South America, Brazil, which I'm sure has some, great locations. But they pick a field that was slicker than a cat trying to bury a turd on a marble floor. Now, the poor players changed cleats every set of down. Then word was they couldn't leave the hotel for safety reasons. Rumor was the NFL hired Trump's security detail. What am I missing here? Shouldn't there be a little bit more due diligence prior to making a footprint in a foreign country?
Well, Dave, you may not be as crazy as you claim to be, because that sound you just heard was the ringing of the bell. This is the new counterweight to Get Off My Lawn. We didn't start Fans First so we would be kicking fans off our lawn all the time. We just thought that was kind of a clever way of saying, go back and work a little harder on your opinion. You didn't nail it this time. Well, Dave, you nailed it this time. I agree with your opinion 100%. The NFL has got to look out for these players when they go international, and they cannot let the venue have to have a year of learning before people get hurt playing football out there. So these players are too expensive, they are too rare, and they need to be taken care of the first time they go on the foreign soil, in my humble opinion. But that's the ringing of the bell. That's to congratulate you on your great opinion. And the same for the other fans. When we hear from you, if it's something really funny, if it's something really entertaining, if it's a really insightful opinion, anything that's notable like that, you will get a ringing of the bell as we celebrate your opinion or your submission to our show. So that's the way this is going to work on Get Off My Lawn. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today on Fans First, a sports podcast. It was my pleasure to be our host. And once again, we really had a great conversation with Wes Durham. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. More good sports content is coming up very soon on another episode of Fans First, a sports podcast. This is Jim Powell saying thanks for coming. We'll see you soon.
Stay tuned, stay passionate, and keep celebrating the sport you love. Visit us at fansfirstpodcast.com to explore more. Sign up for our newsletter to receive exclusive updates, and follow the podcast on social media to join our growing community of sports enthusiasts. Your voice matters to us, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts and connect with fellow fans. See you next time.